Welcome to the podcast.
歡迎收聽
요거서 팟캐스트에
به پادکست ما خوش آمد.
مقیم با این پادکست
欢迎来到我们的播客
Benvenuti sul podcast.
Willkommen beim Podcast.
日本からこんにちは
Buongiorno
你
dall'Italia.
好来自香港
Hello from me.
Shalom از ایران.
Hallo aus Deutschland.
שלום מישראל
Hello, world culture enthusiasts. We're back with another episode of Crossing Cultures, the podcast where guests from all over the world talk about the subtle, surprising, intriguing, and bizarre cultural differences in everyday life. My name is Asaf, and today I'm super excited about today's episode. As you may or may not know, we just came out of very turbulent elections in Israel, and like everything in Israel, election time is very intensive and very controversial. But today we're going to talk about democracy and the process of voting for office and government officials in Japan, the US, Hungary, and Venezuela, in Israel. Before we begin, I want to ask you, the wonderful people that are watching or listening to us, please head on over to our Facebook page, hit that like button, and then when you're done, head over to our YouTube channel and please subscribe. And voila, now you've helped us a lot with a little bit of effort, and you've helped our mission to grow this podcast to more wonderful people like you. And if you happen to be looking for the podcast in any one of your favorite podcast streaming services and you couldn't find it, please let us know via Facebook, or you can write us an email at crossingculturespodcast@gmail.com. I'm going to start it off. Anyone here voted in the last Israeli elections this week? Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to go through, for people who have never voted in Israel, I'm just going to go through kind of I want to hear the technical side of things. So in Israel, usually it starts, you get this little white and pink slip in the mail. They send it to you about a few months before the elections, and that has the number of voting booth and where you're supposed to go when you vote. It's usually either a school or a community center or some kind of municipal office. And then you go there. There's the ballots are open from 7 in the morning to like 10 p.m. You walk in, and then there's this big cardboard kind of screen, and behind it, maybe 40 or 50 different parties have these tiny little notes. You get an envelope. You submit your ID. So you walk in, you bring in your ID, you get one blue envelope, and you're supposed to put one note in that envelope. Maybe I'd say in Israel there's probably like 10 political parties that are well known, and then maybe 40 more that you only encounter when you get to the ballots, which I've never heard of, and you end up getting maybe like a few hundred votes tops. So we'll talk about that, and basically that's it. And then you go out and you have your little blue envelope, and you put it inside, and they manually cross off your name in the voting booklet, and that's it. Everything's done on paper, and even they count the votes on paper. So very, very old school. I don't know why. I don't know how we still do it, but that's kind of how we do it. So let's start with you guys introducing yourselves, and then we'll go around and ask like how technically it's done where you come from.
So, hi everybody, my name is Guillermo. I made Aliyah from Venezuela 2 years ago. I just heard about this from a friend.
Did you vote?
Yeah, I did vote.
And did you vote in Venezuela?
I did vote in Venezuela.
And so just tell me like how similar is it?
Completely dissimilar.
All right.
First of all, I have to say I come from a third world country and we use electrical ballots.
Mm-hmm.
So we are in the startup nation, you know?
Yeah.
And we still use this non-eco-friendly way of voting where 27 ballots get printed by every voter. You have 27 pieces of papers printed just for you, and you just pick one, and the rest is just...
At least 27.
Yeah, at least 27.
Yeah.
And you just pick one, and the rest is trash. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah, well, we'll hear all about how you voted in Venezuela.
Yeah.
Hello again, my name is Tetsu, and I'm from Tokyo, Japan, and I live in Israel 9 years.
And did you vote? When was the last time you voted for an election in Japan?
I think it was 2 years ago something.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's in an embassy here.
Okay.
Not
So
in,
in Japan you can vote through an embassy if you're outside of Japan.
Like if I'm a resident and
Mhm.
I have a paper on there, so
Mhm.
they will invite us to vote.
Oh, interesting. All right.
My name is Minna O'Brien. I made Aliyah 2 years ago from Portland, Oregon, in the United States.
My name is Anna. I live here, I don't know how many years because it's always changing. Let's say netto of 5. And I'm not allowed to vote in Israel, unfortunately, only in the municipality elections. So I vote for the Hungarian elections on the embassy, and I vote locally for the municipality here in Israel.
All right. So we have guests from Venezuela, from Japan, from United States, and from Hungary. Now let's go into the details because I'm super eager to learn. So how do you vote in Venezuela? How does it work?
Well, in Venezuela, when you are 18 years old, you're eligible to vote, and you had to register yourself in this register with your ID number, and just very similar to what is custom in Israel. They send you a notification where is your voting center, which is normally a school or one of those centers, you know. So you go over there, you give your Teudat Seud, your ID, and they use your fingerprint as well, like biometric.
Mm-hmm.
So they read it out. They say, yeah, it's.
Is it
you.
like is it ink and paper or is it like a scanner?
Both?
Okay.
So they scan you in order to check who you are, and then ink and paper in order to to acknowledge that you vote.
Mhm.
And then they dip your finger in this like purple ink, which you cannot take off unless until 1 or 2 days. So it's like you have a mark. that
Okay.
says it.
So there's no double voting. You
There
won't
is,
vote.
yeah. Supposedly there is no double
Uh-huh.
voting. Yeah, exactly. And you
Right.
get a lot of people on Instagram posting
Yeah.
the little finger.
Oh, that's so
yeah,
that's so-
saying that they vote and stuff.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So
Wait, just-
any more in depth? I don't know. You wanna?
we'll get to that. All
Okay.
right. So, Tetsu,
Yes.
tell us about voting in Japan.
Same, like we got the envelope
Mhm.
and they also explain where to vote, the date, place, and we go vote. But we don't do any fingerprint to proof. We just need this paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
And that's it. And so how do you protect against voting fraud if someone wants to vote twice or it just doesn't happen?
You know how many percent people vote in Japan?
I don't know.
First, I tell you, last time it was 48%.
Mm-hmm.
It's very low. So
I think
who
it's
gonna?
higher than the U.S. though.
Yeah.
I believe so. I believe the U.S. is in the 30-something%.
Mm.
Interesting.
It's very bad.
So in this percent, who wanna go twice?
Yeah. You have to be very eager.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And is it done on paper? Is it electronic?
When I did last time in Japan, it was a paper,
Mm-hmm.
like a mark sheet.
Uh-huh.
Like
Oh, you have to fill in like a form, or do you put like a note?
there is a form
Mm.
and write the name.
Okay.
Yes,
Interesting.
like an exam.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about the U.S.
So the U.S. is a little bit complicated because it varies so much
Right.
state to state. Across the whole thing, you get the right to vote at 18. You lose the right to vote if you're a felon. You have to register yourself. There's no automatic registration there. That varies place to place whether you can register the same day you vote or not, and different variations like that. I've only ever voted in Oregon, which is, I believe, the only state to do 100%. It's called absentee voting. So your ballot is mailed to your home. You fill it out, you sign it, you stick it back in an envelope that came with it. You stick it back in the mail, which is a voter participation initiative, which I believe works pretty well. In most other places, you have primarily you go to your polling place to vote, and then it also varies whether that's an electronic machine or a punch ballot. There's a lot of variation across.
And so in Oregon, how is it? The last time you voted, was it like a punch ballot, a voting machine?
It's the absentee ballot, so it gets
Okay.
mailed to your home, and it's kind of like a contract. You just go through it. You write yes or no on the various measures. You write out of the choice of candidates which candidate you're voting for. You sign it at the end. You mail it back in. They check your signature to make sure it
Mhm.
looks like your signature.
All right, I guess that works. And
Wow. In Hungary, we get also a piece of paper that shows that where to go and when to go, and we call it a knocking note. Like it used to be that somebody comes to your door and knocks it. So
Okay.
it's knocking note, we call. But you don't need it for the voting. You just need to go to the place, show your ID and your address card,
Mhm.
and then you just give your signature on the book that contains all the voters. In Hungary, it's automatic. Everybody is on the list. If you are old and sick, or you are sitting in a police because you are arrested,
Mhm.
then you can ask for the moving urn. So you just call the municipality and you say you want to vote, but you can't go, so people will come to you.
Yeah.
But you can vote there.
Yeah, they had that. I mean, I guess they've always had that thing in Israel where you're supposed to vote in some place, but then you can say, oh well, I can't get to my voting place, so there are a few places that you can go to, even if you don't live in the same city. If you're not registered there, you have to fill in a form that says you have some sort of mobility problem, or that you're disabled or you have some other problem, and then you can vote there. And I remember there was a kind of I say remember like it was a year ago. It was like this week. So some people said that it's not okay. You should go and vote where you're registered. And then other people said, well, listen, as long as someone's going to vote, like why would they have to make sure it's the same place that they're registered in the Ministry of Interior Affairs, whereas they might be registered somewhere, there, and then their driving license is from another city, and then I don't know, they live in another city, whatever. So yeah, but I think in Israel the numbers are pretty high. People are very, very involved in politics. We'll get to that. But then also a lot of people don't vote just because of a million reasons, I guess. All right. So is there any difference between like state, municipal, national elections? I mean, first of all, for how long we're all talking about the voting for parliament, right? So parliament in Israel is supposed to sit for 4 years. I don't think that's happened in the last at least 20 years. I don't think that happened.
It's never happened in Israel. As far
I don't think it ever happened. Maybe before I was born, but as far as I can remember, no government has completed its term of 4 years. So in how does it work in Venezuela? Like what's your term supposed to be? How does it ever happen that you complete?
Yeah, it does happen that people complete. Like it's custom that people complete. I believe, if I'm not much mistaken about my national history, that there was this guy who, just bailed out, let's say, in the late 80s. But the rest, like, we don't have something like a prime minister. We have a president, and everybody finishes their periods or dies.
Which is 4 years supposed to be?
It was extended to 6 years by Chavez in the early 2000s, and currently it's 6 years.
And is there any limit on terms? Like you can only do
you
so
can
many?
be re-elected only once, and you can wait for another period and then be re-elected like another time.
Okay, I understand.
But only like consecutively
Twice. Okay, because in Israel there's no limit. You can like Ben Gurion was re-elected I don't know how many times, and Bibi now just broke his record like for the most consecutive days in office for I don't know almost 10 years.
Japan.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have two parliament. One is Shugin, which have a priority, and other is Sangin. It's also have a right to deny, which are decided by Shugin. So these two parliament each had 4 years.
And you vote for both houses at the same time?
No, different time.
Different times.
Yes, but they have each 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe like in the U.S., you vote for president, then you vote for Congress, and it's
Yeah, it's also split up. The U.S. doesn't have a parliamentary system at all. So there's no, forming coalitions, which is also arguably why we only have two major parties, since you can't get minority seats. Either you win or you get nothing. So we really just have the two. Presidents can serve up to 2 terms, and they get voted on every 4 years. There's basically nothing that can call a vote early or late. Then separately, we have the Senate and the House. They also both have re-elections at fixed rates. They don't have any term limits. They can get re-elected until they die. And then kind of the higher up the ladder is, the more attention that election gets. So presidential elections get the most amount of voter engagement. Federal elections get more voter engagement than statewide elections get more than citywide elections, etc.
Okay, so when you go and vote for the president, is it the name of the person on the ballot, or is it the name of the
It's
party?
the person. You vote for people,
specific
not for
person.
parties.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you go to vote for Congress or for the House of Representatives, or
Everything, every position at every level, you're voting for an individual.
I see. Interesting. Okay. Because in Israel, I'll just say we vote only for parties. There was
Right.
one election where they tried to make it personal, and they wanted to be like the U.S., that it would, decrease the number of small political parties. But it ended up doing the exact opposite, because people say, well, I can vote for the president that I want, but I can also use my other vote to elect any party that I choose. But there was an attempt to go more towards like the U.S. system, where there's only 2 parties, because we are at the other extreme. Because we're at the other extreme. In Israel, officially, there are parties that are meant to represent a very specific minority. Like officially, that's on their official creed. They only tend to this part of the population. And it does, there's pros and cons, but one of the cons is that it's very difficult, like we're seeing right now, it's very difficult to form a coalition, because everyone has only their voters' interest in mind, and you end up compromising for almost everything. So the negotiation for coalition is very difficult. All right. And in Hungary?
So we elect for 4 years, and when we go to the parliamentary elections, we have 2 votes. Once we vote for the candidate of the district where we live, and the second is for the party. And it's a super difficult
It's at the same time?
Yeah, it's on the same day. It's 2 different papers. Basically, the Hungarian system was the most difficult of the world. It has been simplified a couple of years ago, but you had the chance to get to mandate 3 different ways. Now it's only 2. Only.
Okay.
So you can get from your district as the representative of your district, or from the party, but the votes that went to the district and they didn't win, they compensate on the other list the people who... So this way the winner takes it all makes basically impossible, because they give some votes also to the smaller parties.
Yeah, in Israel there are some agreements that if you vote for one party and then they don't make it, because you have to there's a threshold that you need to pass. You can't have just like one member of Knesset in the parliament. So if they don't pass the threshold, then they will transfer all their votes by contract to another party. So a lot of people take that into mind. They say, okay, if I vote for this party and they don't pass, my vote still counts because it'll move to another party.
Yeah, we do it too.
We also don't have any runoff voting, which is even more dangerous in a system where you really only get 2. So we have the mechanism of vote splitting, to where when you have a party, for example, a certain number of people think that the Democrats aren't far left enough, and you have just enough interest to run an independent candidate. That independent candidate makes the Republicans more likely to win, because a vote saying, I don't think the Democrats are left enough, takes votes away from them. So you have, I think you get a lot more representation of the people in a parliamentary system.
That's the game of politics. You have to compromise. That's basically the game. All right. So we talked about like who is eligible to vote, and I think in Israel you have to be 18, and that's it. You don't have to do and a citizen, of course, but there's no other criteria. You don't have to be literate. You don't have to know who you're voting for. That's just the law. You can get your citizenship like at noon, and then at 15 minutes later you can vote, even if you've never read a paper, you don't know anything, and you never lose your right to vote in Israel also, which I think is it's also similar in most countries, but in the U.S. I know it's different.
Yeah.
So let's start with that.
Yeah, so I'll put forward the completely neutral fact that that felony disenfranchisement became a law right after black people got the right to vote.
And what is a felony? Just for those who what counts as a felony in the U.S.?
Oh gosh, I don't know if there's like a wide definition of it, but basically, a misdemeanor is a small crime and a felony is a big crime.
Okay.
So something like a speeding ticket is a misdemeanor. There's something like theft under a certain dollar value is a misdemeanor. Over a certain dollar value is a felony.
Okay. All right. And what about Hungary?
Basically, if you sit in prison, you're not allowed to vote. You also can't be elected.
No, in Israel you can and people have sat in prison and became elected even
Amazing.
After you get out of prison, you can vote again.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how about Japan and?
It used to be over 20 years old, and now they changed to 18. And of course, in case if you are sit in a prison or jail, it can. But also, you need to give your residence sign. Otherwise, government don't know where you.
Oh, you have to register your residence. Okay.
Like for example, I live in Tokyo, and I moved to Osaka. And if I don't register in Osaka, so probably government send the letter to the Tokyo address. And if they can transfer to Osaka, yes, I got it, but the place to vote must be in Tokyo.
Ah, I see. Okay.
So you must sign in a residence. Then
you can't just vote wherever you want.
No.
Okay. What about Venezuela?
Well, as far as I know, it used to be that you have to be alive to vote and 18 years old, and of course Venezuelan by nationality. But in my experience and like what results have shown, I don't want to get too political into this, but last couple of elections have been done by people who weren't Venezuelan, who weren't given fake nationalities, dead people who rise from the death and voted, and there are a lot of inflation, but basically a lot of inflation of fake votes, I mean, or like uneligibly votes, but basically you have to be 18 and Venezuelan to vote.
All right.
You can have something we call like antecedentes penales, like a penal background, and there is a certain number of crimes you can commit in order to not be eligible for voting.
Interesting. So we'll get to there's in everything we talk about there's like a huge spectrum, where you can vote wherever you want. You can vote only the place you have physically registered in, and also in the U.S. you can't vote if you have any sort of felony. I'm not 100% sure of what I'm about to say, but I think in Israel there is no crime that will make you lose the right to vote, and that includes, let's say you are a spy against Israel, or you committed an act of terror. But if you are a citizen, then you can still vote.
Wow. After the First World War, when Hungary lost a lot, like 1/3 of its territory, a lot of Hungarians got outside of border, like Slovakia, Romania, a lot of countries around. And a couple of years ago, the Hungarians who live in the surrounding countries got voting right because they got citizenship from the government. So the government was hoping that he will win the votes of the Hungarians living outside of the country, and basically, yes, it is happening. So I don't know, Ukrainian Hungarians are voting also for the Hungarian government.
Well, if they have citizenship.
They have. They never lived in Hungary, maybe never been there, but they.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you could vote, I guess if you could vote in an embassy, then also a lot of Israelis who, either have never lived in Israel or maybe lived just a very short time or left maybe 10 or 20 years ago would of course vote for the parliament because they feel a connection to it, or they have their interest that they want to take care of. Let's talk about the voting day, okay? So in Israel it's a day off. Nobody works unless you're a firefighter or whatever. There's like certain terms that you can work if you're in a restaurant or a hotel service or something like that. But basically, it's a day off, and people go to the beach. People go shopping. People go crazy shopping in Israel. Like everything's on sale. You've seen it. And when you go out, there are like campaigns everywhere. Now in Israel, we'll get to the subject like a little later. Where do you meet your politicians? But you see people that are very involved during the voting day, wearing T-shirts, bearing stickers, putting bumper stickers, things like that. It's very, very visual. You see the flyers everywhere. So kind of run me through the experience of if I visit Venezuela or Japan or the U.S. in voting day. Like,
Well, in Venezuela, voting day is always a Sunday. And so it's no day off. It's just like a day of work for people. Volunteers that go to the poll place, and they have to sit from early in the morning till 10 o'clock in the afternoon, in the night, where everything's closed, and it's actually very chilled. People usually go out and eat with their families after voting. Nobody likes to go voting. Everybody whines about the week before voting, like I don't want to vote, but we don't have a very small abstinent voting. We are like, it's not that great, but it's like 68%.
okay.
Just like sababa.
So Japan same only Sunday, that's why except people really upset on the government, mostly people don't very go to vote. Like only when you really upset to government they go.
So it's like customer service.
I told you it's 48%.
Yeah.
So that's why most of people on the Sunday wanna go to date, to a beach, leisure trip.
Yeah. So
I think they should do a normal day, take off, go.
yeah.
Otherwise,
there have been studies that try to see if that works if you take a day off, and it doesn't. It's not 100% that it works. Some places, like even in the U.S., I know some states have a day off, and some states don't have a day off. Voting rights are pretty much the same. It's a very interesting.
I wonder if Japan, they have 7-Eleven, those stores.
Yeah.
Each 30 meters they have.
Yeah,
a kiosk.
konbini.
So if they start accept to vote in a konbini,
Yes, of course.
then everybody.
Because you can do everything. You can pay your bills. You can get your mail. Everything. And
Because still people are paranoid for the vote in the internet.
okay.
So if not, so maybe convenience store they start to do this.
Yeah.
Then it will be increase the percent.
In the U.S. voting is always on a Tuesday. It's not a day off. There's criticism that discourages basically anybody who's not salaried, anyone who doesn't have flexibility in their workday. There are proposals to make it a holiday. Unfortunately, people who gets exempted on a holiday is also kind of vague, and the same people who tend to be encouraged to work on a holiday are the same people who are already discouraged from voting by it being during the week.
I'll just say I read some studies before this show about voting rates, and it's very inconsistent. Some countries it's a day off, some countries it's always a weekend or a Sunday, and some countries you get fined if you don't vote. But voting rates nonetheless are kind of ubiquitous. They're pretty much the same. They don't really change. I mean, you can't. It's very hard to. I haven't found one study that could group together countries who fine people who don't vote or countries who don't, and correlate that with voting rates. It's really all over the place. So I'm just saying it's a question still an open-ended question if how to get people to vote.
I think you shouldn't call it a right. It should be called either a privilege or a must.
Duty.
A
A duty.
responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you
I
say it's
have-
your civic duty,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
then again, a lot of people all over the world, people are reluctant. They don't want to vote
Yeah.
for so many reasons.
I'd be
because-
hesitant to call it a privilege because privileges get taken away.
Yes, that's true. All right, let's talk about where you meet your politicians. Okay, because I know in the U.S. there's public debates that are televised, and I've heard that in Japan a lot of politicians they actually hit the street to talk to people. It's very common, like literally in the street. In Israel, we don't really have public debates. I think we had like one or two that were kind of experimental, didn't do too well. So you basically, if you want to learn about your representative, you either go to their website, if it's, nowadays you go to their website or you go to their social media page, or you had to read like the pamphlets that they hand out or things like that, or go to one of their rallies. Two things that are pretty common is one, we call it Chuge Bait, which is like a house party that you would do. That you'd have a member of Knesset or somebody from a specific political party gather up people, maybe 10 or 20 people in a person's house, and someone would volunteer their house, and they would sit with them and talk to them for sometimes a few hours to get them to either donate or participate in some way. And the second thing is, which is very declining very fast, is you get these these clips, these like I don't know how to call it, but like every party has a few minutes of airtime on TV, on the national channel that they could broadcast, like between 8 p.m. and like 8:30 or something like that. I'm not sure about the time. And then you get to see everyone. You get to see like the big parties and the tiny little parties, because they all get the funding to do like a very short commercial. Some of them, they have a lot of money, so they'll get the best people. They'll use visual effects and editing and stuff like that. And then other people would just sit at home with like one camera, and it kind of looks like something that very, very low production value. So that is a way to meet your politicians and kind of to get to know what they represent. So how does it work in Venezuela? How do you know?
First of all, I want to say something about here in Israel. It's the absolute spamming of text messages and calls. I don't know about
Yes.
you guys, if like this week was horrifying.
Yes.
I've been blocking numbers and
Yeah.
blocking
Of course.
numbers.
I'll just say that in Israel it's illegal to send someone a text message if you are a business. Okay, you can't like send someone without their consent. And even if you send, you have to add the possibility to unsubscribe. But since all these laws were written and selected by the Knesset, then they exempted themselves.
Of course.
Yes.
So now you can get, and you are spammed. If you are an Israeli citizen, you have an Israeli number, you are spammed during election week.
I talk with politician.
You talk to.
No, not talk. It was tape.
Okay.
Politician talking to me.
Oh,
Shalom.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I don't
Yeah,
know.
they're-
Yeah. There's
They
like
robocalled you?
robocalls. Yeah. So that's that's. Thank you, Guillermo.
Isn't
That's
that-
another way to.
Isn't that illegal? Like, for example, I don't know.
Well,
in
if
the
you
US
write the
it's
rules,
illegal.
then you know. If
It's illegal in the US, right? When to have machines calling you.
Robocalls are not illegal. There are, I think there's something like there's a mechanism to get yourself placed on a do not call list, which pretty much stopped the process. But it's up to you to opt out from a business standpoint.
So wait. So how do you know like what a politician stands for? Is it only on TV? Or?
No, actually, it's pretty cool. Venezuela has been, for pretty much of its contemporary history, very much polarized between like the poor and the rich.
Mm-hmm.
So politicians are always the one that represents the rich or the savior of the poor, and it goes just back and forth with that dance. But what they all do, or most of them all do, is like they do travel around Venezuela, around the country. They do campaign and yeah, they go from city to city, from town to town. They go out, they meet people, they do rallies. People go out, they do manifestations with flags, and people, just to get to know them. And actually, it's kind of nice to have politicians being, quoting, celebrities. They also have like Instagram. More recently, everyone has Instagram, and they're always posting stuff, and Twitter. They have Facebook accounts. Obviously, they don't manage them. They have somebody else to manage them, but they're all over social media. I mean, like, I think in Venezuela that if you don't have a social media, nobody will know who you are as a politician.
In Japan, already major politician doing a party, invite celebs, small wrestler, blah, blah, blah. So doesn't matter while in the election or not, they're already famous of this activation.
But how do you know like what they stand for? How do you?
Okay, we have while in election times, we like a national broadcast center always broadcast the candidate. But this time is so crazy show because 30% of the candidate is totally like a crazy slogan. Last election, we had one candidate. He want to destroy this national broadcasting center. So he said, let's destroy the national broadcasting center. And he bring a lot of the candidates. So it was all on the TV. And but he win, actually.
Oh, really?
He got one seat. And after he win, he collect 3 another politicians from other party. Now he have a 4 seat.
Okay.
But you can see a lot of crazy clowns on TV.
Yeah.
But some people just really crazy. But some people doing a clown. But when they become the politician, he become really normal.
Okay.
Like a good.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
All right.
So in the U.S., first in terms of presidential elections, you have the round of primary debates with just Republicans and just Democrats, and that's really getting out of hand. You're getting, you're getting a stage with 15 people on it, and then once candidates are selected, there are usually 3 or 4 debates between the candidates hosted by the different networks. The U.S. also has the quirk of the Electoral College, and that means that each state is assigned a number of points based on the size of their population, and then it doesn't matter if the candidate wins 50.5% of the vote or 90% of the vote, they get all of those points. So that means that candidates spend their time in states that are in question, states that like sometimes vote red, sometimes vote blue. Swing states, exactly. So like I said, I come from Oregon, which is not a swing state. There are really only 5 or 6 swing states in each election.
Which are, I think, Ohio, Florida, and...
Yeah, nobody ever cares about Ohio except during presidential elections. So in addition to the debates, candidates will also do these live events, these town halls, these rallies, whatever. I've never seen one done in Oregon. Like they really focus their attention on either California, Texas, like stuff that gets attention, or the swing states, and then not specifically presidential for Congress and governor, whatever. They reach out to you via social media. You hear about them through news events, through rallies, through talking points. Pretty much it comes through the media.
All right.
When you talk about Hungarian politics, it's a must to mention that 30 years ago we had the changing of the regime because we were, occupied by the Soviet Union and we had socialist system. But basically, there were already 2 candidates from the same party. So basically, you could choose between the people, but it was the same party. So it was a kind of, democratic system that was nothing behind. So our political culture now is like 30 years old. That is close to 0, of course.
Yeah, it's very young.
And after the changing, it was a very kind, very nice, very gentleman-like system. People were really polite to each other. Everybody in the parliament were very educated, and of course, after 30 years, we kind of lose it. We don't have this kind of very naive and friendly political attitudes anymore. So,
I just wanted to ask in Israel and Hungary, I know in Israel, like the time of campaign, like is a set amount of time, right? That people are campaigning. It's like a period of
I think
3
it's
months.
officially it's 2 weeks, but it's all year round, of course. I mean, officially it's supposed to be like you get to broadcast your commercials for 2 weeks.
But isn't it it's something like 3 months between the calling of elections and voting, right?
I'm not sure. I don't
Okay.
know.
in Hungary, it's this way. Like the president says that, okay, this is the date of the elections, and then the campaign starts officially.
Yeah,
of course.
I think it's.
So yeah, there's the difference that in the U.S. there's nothing to guide how much time people should spend campaigning.
Yeah.
So like as a rule of thumb, presidential elections are 2 years, which is half of a term.
Yeah.
So yeah, whenever I hear Israelis talk about like, oh my God, the election, this campaign is lasting for too long, I'm always like, you don't know, you don't know what it's like. Yeah, and then that norm might be changing because Trump started holding what he described as campaign rallies weeks after his inauguration.
All right.
U.S. elections have an impact also in Latin
Yeah.
countries like Venezuela.
Yeah,
Like everybody
sure.
go crazy about it. It's like watching the
I just wanted
Super Bowl.
to add something. But
Yeah.
Like we used to have these political debates in the TV, in the national TV. There was all the candidates for prime minister invited, and everybody could talk about the programs. We don't have it anymore, but every party got 5 minutes now. Before the last elections, they got 5 minutes, and we have a joke party, the two-tailed dog party,
Two-tailed
dog,
All right.
and basically they said
How does it called in Hungarian?
Kétfarkú kutyapárt.
Okay.
Yeah. And the guy who went in, they said everybody said, every oppositional party said that it's ridiculous that they are never invited to the TV. They get 5 minutes in 4 years to introduce themselves. So the joke party's guy, the candidate, went in a chicken costume. And,
so same thing happened in Hungary, like Japan.
And the reporter was asking serious questions, like, okay, I was reading your program. It was 7,600 pages. I read it, of course. And I want to ask you questions about it. And the guy in the chicken costume said, "Kot, kot, 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 kot." And this was the 5 minutes.
That's
Hilarious.
All right. Okay. I want to ask a huge question in a very short period of time. So imagine that somebody is listening to this episode and they don't know anything about Japanese politics. They don't know anything about American politics. They don't know anything about Israeli, Hungarian, Venezuelan politics. Let's try and sum up. I'm going to try and do the impossible. Sum up like the Israeli political map in very few sentences. I'm going to say that in Israel, basically, the way I see it is the political map is there are 3 axes. Axes? One is the secular versus religious axis, which either wants to turn everything a little bit more conservative, more religion, put religion more into the law, or the other way, which is to take religion out out from the laws and allow everyone to do what they want, even if it's against the Jewish religion or other religion. That's axis number 1. Axis number 2 is, of course, let's call it what usually people talk about when they talk about Israel, the political situation. It's either the 2-state solution or some other kind of peace agreement with our neighbors, or the other. These are called the pigeons, and the other is called the doves. Sorry, the doves. The doves. It's the same word in Hebrew, so dove, or the hawk, which is a very nationalistic view of not giving any land away, not even in the price of not signing any peace agreement. And the third axis, of course, is the economic axis between socialism and pro-union, funding of government, things like that, and the other part, which is very liberal, capitalistic. So that is, and everything else, every political party in Israel is kind of somewhere located in that kind of matrix of decisions. So that was my attempt to wrap up the Israeli political map. Now it's your turn.
Okay, Venezuela is polarized between communists and normal people. That's it for me.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And Japan?
Japan, there is a strong party. It's called LDP, Liberal Democratic Party. This is a major, and the rest is against him. Like there is a communist, which are strong but small, and the socialist is almost going to die, and there is a Democrat, but it's like middle but a little bit to left. But there's also like a patriot in a few percent.
And what are the focal points that people
Like
mostly economic?
mostly economic, and they try to bring the subject more about national security or this issue. But still, nobody care more about the economy.
I see. All right, Mina.
God, that's a big question. But I would say that unfortunately we only get one political axis. You really only get Democrats and Republicans. We don't get enough choices to get three axes. That sounds really nice. Very generally speaking, Republicans tend to line up more conservative. Democrats tend to line up more social. Yeah, and to someone outside the U.S., I would warn them, especially coming from either a European system or a parliamentary system, that because we don't have that parliamentary mechanism, our political window is much smaller. Like that window moves around, but the left and the right are closer to each other than you would expect coming from outside the system.
All right, Anna.
Our system is also much more simplified than yours. It's much more homogeneous society. So basically, it's left and right. Or now recently it's more the government that is a right, conservative, and the opposition who is extremely divided. The second strongest party is a far right, really hard extremist party, and there are some leftovers of the regime changing parties. Basically.
All right.
That's it.
So we're gonna have to wrap up. We're not gonna make it to our rapid fire question, but I'm still gonna have one rapid fire question. So I want you to do it as fast as possible. What is your favorite local, as in where you come from, your favorite local fictional character? If you have the answer, just answer.
Obama's cancer gun.
What?
Yeah. Apparently, one of Obama shoot a cancer ray to Chavez and gave him cancer. So that's my favorite.
All right. We'll have a link in the description. Mina.
I kind of want to tie it into politics and say President Bartlett from The West Wing,
Oh,
Alright.
yes.
but I'll also say Chidi from The Good Place.
Okay. And?
For me, it's Gombots Arthur. It's a round Arthur. Okay, he's from a tale. And he's eating all kind of chocolates, and he can talk 5 minutes that I like this chocolate and this chocolate. In 5 minutes he's telling.
Just describing chocolate?
Yes, that's my favorite.
All right. I'll just say there was a comic book character in Israel called Super Schlumper. Schlumper in Hebrew means like somebody who keeps like failing and doing like mistakes. So he was like a superhero that is very clumsy.
Okay.
And which is kind of like the Israeli. Okay, in a way. Do you have a fictional character of us? That's
Okay, Astro Boy.
Astro Boy.
Nice.
All right. Okay, so that is a good way to transition into the end of our show. I want to thank my guests. You were great. Again, this is something we could talk about for days, but we don't have the time. So thank you, and thank you everyone who was watching. If you want to talk to us, please let us know how things are where you're from. We want to hear from you. Look at our Facebook page. Please like us on Facebook and give us a subscribe on YouTube so you won't miss any of our episodes. Send us an email. We're going to have the email written down. And if you want to be a guest, if you want to comment, if you want to say anything, we welcome you to talk to us and let us know if you have any suggestions. So that's it for now, and thank you very much. See you on the next episode.